A virgin bride was about to be burned. Until a drunken cowboy fired into the air, the town woke slowly under a pale morning sky, the kind of sky that felt heavy even before the day truly began. Dust drifted along the empty street, carried by a weak wind that rattled loose wooden signs and pushed dry leaves against the buildings. Most mornings in the small frontier town were simple and predictable, but this day felt different from the moment the sun rose. People stepped outside their homes earlier than usual, drawn by quiet whispers spreading from door to door. No one spoke loudly at first. Conversations were short, uncertain, and filled with glances toward the church at the center of town. Something serious was happening there, something that made even the boldest residents speak in low voices. By mid-morning, a crowd had formed near the churchyard. Men stood with crossed arms, women gathered in small groups, and children were kept close by their parents. The atmosphere felt tense, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. At the center of the gathering stood a wooden platform that had been used in the past for town announcements and ceremonies. Today it carried a darker purpose. A young woman stood on it, dressed in a white bridal gown that looked too delicate for the dusty surroundings. The fabric had once been bright and new, but now it was slightly wrinkled, marked by the long hours she had already endured. Her name was Clara, though many in the town barely knew her well enough to say it with confidence. She had arrived months earlier, alone and quiet, renting a small room near the edge of town. She spoke politely when spoken to, worked hard, and never caused trouble. Yet rumors had begun to surround her, slowly at first, then growing louder until they became impossible to ignore. Clara kept her hands folded tightly in front of her. Her eyes moved across the crowd, searching for kindness, for understanding, but finding mostly uncertainty. Some people looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. A few avoided looking at her entirely, as if ashamed to witness what was happening. The elders of the town stood nearby, their expressions serious and firm. They believed they were protecting tradition, preserving order in a place where rules had always guided life. In their eyes, Clara had brought shame and confusion. Whether those beliefs were based on truth or fear no longer seemed to matter to them. The sheriff stood slightly apart from the elders, his hat pulled low over his face. He shifted his weight from one foot to another, clearly uncomfortable. He had been called to maintain order, but even he seemed unsure whether he should allow events to continue or step in to stop them. His eyes moved often toward Clara, then back toward the crowd, as if searching for someone else to make the decision for him. People whispered among themselves. "She should explain herself," one woman murmured. "They say she lied," another replied quietly. "No proof," someone else muttered, though their voice quickly faded. Rumors had spread quickly over the past week. Some claimed Clara had deceived a respected man. Others said she had broken promises that were never fully explained. The truth had become lost among stories repeated too many times. Each retelling added new details, new judgments, until no one could remember where the facts ended and imagination began. Clara's thoughts drifted back to the day she arrived in town. She had come seeking a fresh start, leaving behind a difficult past she rarely spoke about. The town had seemed welcoming at first. Shopkeepers greeted her kindly, and neighbors offered small smiles. She had believed she might finally find peace, but peace had slowly turned into isolation. Small misunderstandings had grown into suspicion. People began to watch her more closely, interpreting her silence as secrecy. When one influential man accused her publicly, the balance shifted. Suddenly she was no longer a newcomer trying to belong. She was an outsider carrying blame. Now she stood alone before the same people she had hoped would become her community. The church bell rang once, its deep sound echoing across the square. Conversations stopped. The elder leading the gathering stepped forward, clearing his throat as he prepared to speak. Before he could begin, a young boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why is she standing there?" he asked softly. The mother hesitated before answering. "Because some people believe she has done wrong," she said carefully, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But has she?" the boy asked. The woman had no answer. Clara noticed small moments like that, the doubt hidden beneath the crowd's silence. Not everyone agreed with what was happening, yet fear kept many from speaking openly. No one wanted to stand against the majority and risk becoming the next target. The elder began to speak about honor, tradition, and the need for justice. His words sounded practiced, shaped by years of authority. He spoke about protecting the town's values, about setting an example for future generations. Each sentence felt heavy, pressing down on the crowd like a weight. Clara listened quietly. She had already tried to explain herself many times, but each attempt had been dismissed. Now she felt exhausted, not only from fear, but from the realization that truth alone might not be enough to save her. A breeze lifted the edge of her dress, carrying dust across the platform. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the warmth of happier days, the hope she once carried. She wondered if anyone truly saw her as a person rather than a symbol of their fears. Behind the crowd, two men argued quietly. One believed the situation had gone too far. The other insisted that rules must be followed. Their disagreement reflected the larger struggle hidden beneath the gathering, a town divided between compassion and control. The sheriff stepped forward slightly, then stopped again. His hesitation did not go unnoticed. Some people watched him closely, waiting to see if he would act. Others hoped he would remain silent so events could proceed without interruption. Time seemed to slow as the sun climbed higher. Shadows shortened, and the heat began to press against everyone's skin. The tension became almost unbearable, like a storm waiting to break. Far down the road leading into town, a faint sound appeared, hooves striking dry earth. At first no one noticed. The crowd's attention remained fixed on the platform. But slowly the sound grew louder, echoing against buildings and drawing curious glances from those standing at the edges. A lone rider approached, moving unevenly as if tired or distracted. Dust rose behind him, marking his path toward the town square. His hat sat low, and his posture suggested weariness. No one yet understood how important his arrival would become. Clara opened her eyes and glanced toward the road. She did not know why, but something about the distant rider caught her attention. For a brief moment, her fear softened into curiosity. The elders continued speaking, unaware that the quiet rhythm of hooves signaled a turning point. The rider drew closer, slowing as he noticed the unusual gathering. People began to turn toward him, their focus shifting away from the platform. Conversations paused again, replaced by curiosity and confusion. Clara felt the atmosphere change slightly, like a breath held too long finally being released. She did not know who the rider was or what he wanted. But as he approached the crowd, something inside her stirred, an unexpected feeling that the story unfolding around her was not yet finished. The rider slowed his horse as he reached the edge of the crowd. Dust clung to his boots and coat, and his posture showed the weight of long travel. People turned to look at him, some annoyed at the interruption, others relieved by the distraction from the heavy mood that had settled over the town square. He was known by some as Cole, a drifting cowboy who came and went without much warning. He had worked on nearby ranches from time to time, never staying long enough to build deep roots. His reputation was mixed. Some said he was reckless, others said he had a strong sense of fairness hidden beneath his rough behavior. Today, he looked tired and slightly unsteady, as if the previous night had been long and difficult. Cole noticed the platform first, then the young woman standing on it. The white dress caught his attention immediately because it looked out of place in the dusty setting. He frowned, scanning the faces around him. No one looked happy, no one looked calm. "What's going on here?" he asked loudly, his voice breaking the silence. A few people ignored him, others muttered under their breath. Finally, a man near him spoke. "Town business doesn't concern you." Cole raised an eyebrow and glanced again toward Clara. Something about her stillness felt wrong to him. She didn't look angry or guilty. She looked exhausted, as if she had already fought a long battle alone. "That's so," he said slowly. "Looks serious enough to concern anyone." The man beside him shook his head and stepped away, clearly unwilling to argue. Cole guided his horse closer, weaving through the crowd. Some people moved aside reluctantly, giving him space but watching him carefully. As he approached the platform, the elder speaking paused, clearly irritated by the interruption. The elder's eyes narrowed. "You are disturbing an important matter," he said firmly. "Step back." Cole tilted his head slightly, studying the elder and then the sheriff standing nearby. He noticed the tension in the sheriff's shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes. That alone told Cole that things were not as simple as they appeared. "What kind of matter?" Cole asked. "Seems like a lot of people gathered for something heavy." The elder straightened, clearly annoyed. "This is a matter of honor and community order. You are an outsider here." "Do not interfere." The words outsider hung in the air. Cole gave a short laugh, though it carried no humor. "Outsider or not, I still have eyes," he said quietly. "And what I see looks like a young woman standing alone while everyone else judges her." A murmur moved through the crowd. Some people agreed silently, others frowned at his boldness. Clara watched him carefully. She did not know him, but his presence felt different from the others. He was not looking at her with suspicion or pity. He was simply observing, as if trying to understand before deciding anything. The elder began speaking again, attempting to regain control of the moment. He described accusations against Clara in strong terms, emphasizing the need to protect the town's reputation. His words sounded firm, but they avoided specific details. Cole noticed that quickly. "What exactly did she do?" Cole asked, interrupting again. The elder hesitated for a moment, then answered vaguely. "She brought dishonor through deception." Cole frowned deeper. "That's not much of an explanation." Some people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The lack of clear facts had been bothering many of them too, though few dared to say it aloud. Clara felt a small spark of hope, though she tried not to let it show. She had spoken in her own defense before, but her words had been dismissed quickly. Hearing someone else question the situation felt strangely powerful. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Maybe we should keep things calm," he said cautiously. "No need for arguments." Cole glanced at him. "Sheriff, are you in charge here or just watching?" The question made several people gasp quietly. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but did not respond immediately. His silence only increased the tension. The elder stepped forward again, clearly determined to end the discussion. "Enough," he said firmly. "This matter has already been decided by the council." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Decided based on what? Rumors?" The word caused another wave of murmurs. Some faces in the crowd showed relief that someone had finally spoken openly. Others looked angry, feeling their authority challenged. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. She had almost given up hope that anyone would question the situation. Now each word from the cowboy felt like a small shield forming around her. A woman in the crowd suddenly spoke. "Maybe we should hear more," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but it was enough to shift the energy slightly. Another man shook his head. "The council already decided," he insisted, though his voice lacked confidence. Cole slid off his horse slowly, landing on the ground with a heavy step. Up close, he looked tired but focused. Whatever fog had been clouding him earlier seemed to fade as he studied the situation more carefully. He walked closer to the platform, stopping a respectful distance away. "Miss," he said gently to Clara, "did they let you explain yourself properly?" She hesitated, unsure whether she was allowed to answer. The elder tried to interrupt, but the sheriff raised a hand slightly, signaling for calm. "Yes," Clara said quietly, "but they did not believe me." Her voice carried across the square, soft but clear. For a moment, everyone listened. Cole nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. He turned back toward the crowd. "Then maybe the problem isn't her explanation," he said. "Maybe it's that nobody wanted to listen." The statement struck deeper than anyone expected. People looked at each other, unsure how to respond. The elder's patience began to fade. "You are creating disorder," he said sharply. "Leave now." Cole crossed his arms. "I might," he said calmly. "But not before understanding why a whole town looks ready to make a decision without clear truth." The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust across the square. The tension felt heavier than before, but also different. The crowd was no longer united in silence. Doubt had entered the space, spreading slowly from one person to another. Clara watched the faces around her. Some people who had avoided her gaze earlier now looked at her directly, as if seeing her for the first time. A young man stepped forward hesitantly. Maybe we rushed," he said quietly, though he quickly stepped back again, afraid of speaking too loudly. The elder's expression hardened. "Enough delays," he announced. "We will proceed." But the energy had changed too much. The certainty that once controlled the crowd now felt fragile. Cole felt a growing sense of urgency. He did not know Clara's full story, but he knew injustice when he saw it. He could walk away and forget this town forever. That would be easier, safer. Yet something inside him refused to let him leave. He looked up at the sky briefly, as if searching for patience. Then he glanced back at Clara. She looked tired but strong, standing quietly despite everything. The moment felt like a turning point. The next decision, whether to step forward or step back, would shape everything that followed. The elder's voice rose again, firm and controlled, as if nothing had changed. He spoke about order, about decisions already made, and about how the town must remain united. Yet his words no longer carried the same strength. Doubt had entered the crowd, and once doubt appeared, it could not easily be pushed away. Clara stood quietly, feeling the weight of every gaze. The heat of the afternoon pressed down on her shoulders, and the air felt thick with tension. She could sense the shift in the crowd. Some people looked uncertain now, glancing at each other as if searching for permission to question what was happening. Cole remained still near the front, watching carefully. His mind moved quickly, trying to decide what to do next. He had not planned to involve himself when he rode into town that morning. He had only wanted a drink of water and maybe a place to rest. Yet now he felt tied to the moment, as if leaving would mean abandoning something important. The elder lifted his hand, signaling that the gathering should continue. A few men moved closer to the platform, ready to carry out the decision. Clara felt her chest tighten. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breathing. She had tried to remain calm all day, but the feeling of time running out made her hands tremble slightly. The sheriff shifted again, clearly struggling with his role. He looked toward Cole for a moment, then back at the elder. The hesitation on his face told everyone that he was unsure about what was happening, even if he had not yet spoken openly. The crowd grew quiet, the kind of silence that comes before something important. Even the wind seemed to slow. Cole felt a sudden clarity. Words alone were not enough anymore. The elder had ignored questions, and the crowd was falling back into old patterns of obedience. If something didn't interrupt the moment, everything would continue exactly as planned. He took a slow breath. Then, before anyone could predict his action, he lifted his revolver and fired a single shot into the air. The sound exploded across the square, sharp and echoing against the buildings. Birds scattered from rooftops, and several people gasped in shock. The sudden noise shattered the tension like glass breaking. Everything froze. The elder stopped mid-sentence, his eyes wide with surprise. The men near the platform stepped back instinctively. Clara opened her eyes quickly, startled but also aware that something had changed. Cole lowered the revolver immediately, keeping it pointed safely toward the ground. His face remained calm, though his heart beat fast. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Nobody moves until we slow down and think." Some people looked angry at the interruption, but many others looked relieved. The loud sound had forced everyone to pause, breaking the momentum that had been pushing events forward without reflection. The sheriff stepped forward quickly. "Put that away," he said, though his voice lacked real anger. There was more concern than authority in his tone. Cole nodded and returned the revolver to its holster without resistance. "Done," he said, "but maybe now we can talk without rushing toward something we can't undo." The elder recovered from the shock, his face tightening with frustration. "You have crossed a line," he said sharply. "This is unacceptable behavior." "Maybe," Cole replied calmly, "but what's more unacceptable is making a decision without clear truth." The words hung in the air. Several people nodded slightly, though they tried not to draw attention to themselves. A woman near the back spoke up again, louder this time. "Maybe we should listen more," she said, "just for a moment." The elder looked at her, clearly unhappy, but the unity of the crowd had weakened. Others began murmuring agreement. The sudden interruption had given them courage. The sheriff raised his hand. "Let's settle down," he said. "No more sudden actions." "But maybe we should hear more before continuing." The elder hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The authority he had relied on felt less solid now that people were questioning him openly. Clara felt a small wave of relief, though she remained cautious. She knew the situation could still turn against her quickly, yet the pause gave her something she had almost lost: time. Cole stepped slightly to the side, giving space but staying close enough to observe. He avoided looking like he was taking control. Instead, he let the crowd begin to speak. A man near the front cleared his throat nervously. "I heard something different," he said quietly. "About what happened?" The elder frowned. "Speak clearly," he demanded. The man swallowed. "I heard that the accusations came from one person, not many." Another voice joined. "Yes," a woman said, "and I never saw proof." The murmurs grew louder as more people began sharing small pieces of information. Some had doubted the accusations earlier but had stayed silent because they thought everyone else believed them. Clara listened carefully, feeling emotion rise in her chest. Each voice felt like a small light breaking through darkness. The elder tried to regain control. "These are only rumors," he insisted. "But weren't the accusations rumors too?" someone asked from the crowd. The question caused a ripple of quiet agreement. The sheriff stepped forward again, this time more confident. "Maybe we need to slow down," he said firmly. "If there are different stories, then we need to hear them properly." Cole watched quietly, satisfied that the situation had shifted. He had not solved anything yet, but he had created space for doubt and discussion. Clara took a deep breath and spoke softly. "I never asked for this," she said. "I only wanted to be heard." Her voice carried across the square, touching even those who had stood firmly against her earlier. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. The afternoon sun moved slowly across the sky, casting long shadows as the tension began to transform into something else. Not peace, but possibility. The crowd was no longer a single force moving in one direction. It had become a group of individuals thinking for themselves again. Cole leaned against a nearby post, watching carefully. He knew the hardest part was still ahead. Stopping the moment was only the first step. Now the truth had to come forward, and truth often brought new challenges. But for now, Clara was no longer alone against a silent crowd. The square no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a place of questions. People stood in small groups, talking in low but serious voices. The fear that had once kept them silent had weakened. Now that someone had interrupted the moment, it seemed easier to speak. The sheriff stepped forward and removed his hat, wiping his forehead slowly. "We will not move forward until we understand everything clearly," he said in a steady voice. "If there are different sides to this story, then we will hear them." The elder looked frustrated, but even he could see that control had slipped from his hands. The crowd was no longer fully behind him. Too many faces showed doubt. Clara stood quietly on the platform, her hands still folded but her breathing calmer now. She did not know what would happen next, yet she felt something she had not felt all morning: hope. Cole stayed near the edge of the platform, arms crossed, saying nothing. He understood that the next steps needed to come from the town itself. If he spoke too much, they might blame him again for interference. So he watched and waited. One of the shopkeepers stepped forward. He was an older man with kind eyes who had sold Clara groceries many times. "I want to say something," he began, clearing his throat. The sheriff nodded. "Go on." "I've known her since she arrived," the shopkeeper said. "She always paid fairly, she worked hard. She kept to herself, I never saw her cause trouble." A few others nodded in agreement. The elder responded quickly. "Good manners do not erase deception." "But what deception?" the shopkeeper asked gently. "We keep repeating that word, yet no one explains it clearly." The question hung heavy in the air. A young woman stepped forward next. She looked nervous but determined. "The accusation came from Mr. Harlan," she said quietly. Several people murmured at the name. Mr. Harlan was a respected landowner in town. He had influence and wealth. His word carried weight. The sheriff frowned slightly. "Explain," he said. The young woman swallowed. "He said she promised to marry him, then he claimed she broke that promise and embarrassed him." Clara's face flushed slightly, but she lifted her chin. She had nothing to hide now. Cole's eyes narrowed. The story sounded less like dishonor and more like wounded pride. The sheriff looked toward Clara. "Is that true?" She shook her head gently. "He asked for marriage. I told him I needed time. I never made a promise." The crowd grew quiet again, but this silence was different. It was thoughtful. Another voice rose from the back. "I remember that evening," a ranch hand said. "He was drinking heavily. He spoke loudly about how she would agree soon." More murmurs followed. The elder tried to regain firmness. "Even if there was misunderstanding, it caused shame." "Shame for who?" someone asked. The simple question struck deep. Cole shifted his weight slightly, watching carefully. He could see the direction things were moving now. The story was no longer about Clara's actions. It was about pride and power. The sheriff turned toward two men standing near the church steps. "You both were present when the accusation was made. Did you hear her promise anything?" The men exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one spoke. "No, Sheriff, we only heard Mr. Harlan speaking." The other nodded slowly. "He was upset, said she made him look foolish." The crowd stirred again. People began connecting the pieces on their own. Clara felt tears press against her eyes, but she forced herself to remain steady. She had feared that no one would ever speak for her. Now the truth was rising slowly, like the sun breaking through clouds. The sheriff turned toward the elder. "It seems we acted too quickly," he said carefully. The elder's face tightened. "We acted to protect order. But order must be built on truth, the sheriff replied quietly. The tension that once pushed the town toward harsh action now shifted into discomfort. Some people avoided looking at Clara, others looked directly at her, their expressions filled with regret. Cole finally spoke, his voice calm. "It's easy to believe the loudest voice," he said. "Harder to question it." No one argued with him this time. A woman near the front stepped closer to the platform. "Clara," she said softly, using her name for the first time that day. "Why didn't you defend yourself more strongly?" Clara answered honestly. "I tried, but when many people repeat the same thing, one voice feels small." The honesty in her words moved several people. They began to understand how fear spreads and grows when no one challenges it. The sheriff straightened his shoulders. "This matter is not settled by rumors," he announced clearly. "We will not punish anyone without proof." The elder looked down briefly, realizing the crowd no longer supported him as before. One of the younger men stepped forward, addressing the gathering. "We almost made a mistake today," he said. "A serious one." The weight of those words settled over everyone. Clara slowly stepped down from the platform, her legs slightly weak but steady enough. No one tried to stop her. Instead, people moved aside, creating space for her to stand among them rather than above them. That small shift changed everything. She was no longer a figure of accusation. She was a person standing within her community. Cole watched her carefully. He saw the way people's expressions softened as they truly saw her for the first time. The sheriff turned toward the crowd again. "We must speak with Mr. Harlan before drawing any final conclusions," he said. "But for now, this gathering is over." Relief moved through the square like a gentle wave. Conversations broke out again, but this time they were thoughtful rather than harsh. Some people approached Clara quietly. "I'm sorry," the shopkeeper said first. Others followed with simple nods and brief apologies. Not everyone spoke, but the tone had changed completely. The elder stepped down from his place and walked away without another word. His authority had been shaken, not through anger, but through truth. Clara looked toward Cole for a moment. He gave a small nod, not seeking praise, only acknowledging that the moment had passed. But inside the town, something deeper was changing. The event had forced everyone to examine their own choices. They had nearly allowed pride and rumor to guide them. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the square returned to its quiet state. Yet the silence now felt different. It felt reflective. Clara stood near the church steps, breathing in slowly. The fear that had once gripped her chest began to loosen. Cole approached gently. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Because you stopped them." He shook his head slightly. "No, because they finally listened." She understood what he meant. The hardest part had not been the interruption. It had been the willingness of the town to admit doubt and allow truth to surface. And as the sun lowered in the sky, casting warm light over the buildings, the people of the town knew they would remember this day, not as a day of punishment, but as a day they nearly forgot who they were. The square had emptied slowly, leaving behind only a few lingering voices, and the occasional sound of hooves clopping along the dusty road. The tension that had once hung over the town like a heavy cloud had lifted, replaced by a quiet reflection. People moved more carefully now, their eyes searching the faces around them for signs of understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. The crowd that had been ready to act in haste had dissolved, leaving only individuals thinking about the consequences of their own judgments. Clara stood near the church steps, her hands resting lightly at her sides. She had walked down from the platform with careful steps, feeling the relief of being able to breathe again. The warmth of the late afternoon sun fell across her shoulders, and the dust that had clung to her dress earlier in the day no longer mattered. What mattered now was that she had survived a day that could have ended very differently. She turned her gaze toward the road, where Cole's horse waited. The cowboy had remained quietly at the edge of the crowd, his presence steady but unobtrusive. He had done what he could to interrupt the moment, to give the town a pause, and to allow the truth to come forward. Now, with the immediate danger gone, he seemed ready to leave, his face calm, almost thoughtful. "Thank you," Clara said softly, her voice carrying a quiet sincerity, "for what you did and for making them listen." Cole shook his head slowly. "I didn't do much," he said, his tone low. "They started to hear when they realized they might be wrong. You just needed someone to give them a reason to think." Clara considered his words. She had felt powerless all morning, unable to change the crowd's mind, unable to convince them that the accusations were false. Yet in that brief moment when a shot had split the silence, everything had shifted. Sometimes, she realized, it took only one action to break a cycle that had been building for years. Around the square, townspeople began to speak quietly among themselves. Some apologized to one another for their own quick judgments. Others discussed what they had learned about Mr. Harlan's accusations. The truth had surfaced in pieces, but it was enough to create doubt where certainty had once dominated. The community had been forced to examine its own beliefs and actions, and that reflection was more powerful than any punishment could have been. Clara noticed a few familiar faces approaching her now. The shopkeeper who had spoken earlier nodded with a small smile. "I'm sorry for believing too quickly," he said. "I should have thought more before joining in with the others." She smiled faintly, appreciating the honesty. "Thank you," she replied. "That means more than you know." One by one, other townspeople came forward with similar sentiments. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. It was a recognition that mistakes had been made and that they could be corrected through understanding rather than force. Cole watched quietly as the town moved toward reconciliation. He understood that the hardest part was not just interrupting the moment, but helping people see the value of truth, even when it challenged their beliefs. The lesson would not be forgotten quickly, and it would shape the way they treated one another in the future. Clara turned to Cole, noting the small smile on his face. "Will you stay in town?" she asked. Cole shook his head. "No," he said, looking down the road. "I don't belong here, but you have a place now." She nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and admiration. The cowboy had been a stranger, someone who had wandered into their lives unexpectedly, yet his presence had been crucial. Sometimes people entered life at exactly the right moment, changing outcomes in ways that could never be forgotten. As Cole mounted his horse, he glanced back one last time. The sun was low in the sky now, casting long shadows across the square. The buildings glowed in warm light, and the dust from the day seemed to settle quietly into the streets. The town would remember this day not for accusations or fear, but for the moment when truth and courage interrupted panic and rumor. Clara took a deep breath and looked around at the townspeople who remained. Some were talking quietly, reflecting on the events of the day. Others lingered in silence, taking in the lessons learned. There was no celebration, no applause, only the quiet understanding that had come after a difficult trial. The sheriff approached, tipping his hat slightly. "You handled yourself well," he said to Clara. "Not many could have stood there as calmly as you did." She nodded, grateful for his words. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was everyone who finally chose to think for themselves." The sheriff's expression softened. "That's true. Maybe this town will remember this day, and maybe it will be better for it." The church bells rang faintly in the distance, their sound drifting across the quiet square. The noise carried a sense of closure, of time moving forward, and Clara felt the weight of fear and uncertainty lifting from her shoulders. The day had been difficult, filled with tension and threat, but it had ended in reflection and understanding. Cole turned his horse toward the road, ready to leave. He gave a small wave, and Clara returned it, understanding that their paths might never cross again. Yet she knew she would remember him, not as a savior, but as someone who reminded a town to pause, to listen, and to seek truth before action. As he rode away, the townspeople began moving slowly toward their homes. The streets no longer felt oppressive or heavy. Children played quietly along the edges, and merchants resumed their daily routines. The events of the day had left a lasting impression, but life would continue. Only now it would carry the memory of how quickly fear could be interrupted, and how even one small act could change the course of events. Clara stood alone for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around her. She touched the fabric of her dress, feeling the rough texture against her fingertips. The white material was no longer just a symbol of accusation. It had become a symbol of survival, of patience, and of the courage to face impossible odds. She turned toward her small home on the edge of town, taking slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall felt lighter than before, each breath carried relief. She had faced a town ready to judge her without hearing the truth, and she had survived. She had been seen, finally, for who she truly was. As evening fell, Clara stepped inside her home and closed the door behind her. The quiet of the room felt comforting. She knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and perhaps whispers would linger in town. Yet she also knew that the truth had been spoken, and the people who had nearly condemned her had been reminded of the importance of understanding. The day had started with fear and tension, but it ended with reflection and hope. Clara allowed herself a small smile, feeling the release of a long-held weight. She had survived the moment that could have changed everything, and in doing so had found a new strength within herself. Outside, the town moved quietly into evening. The streets were peaceful now, lit by the golden light of the setting sun. The air felt softer, carrying the lessons learned from the events of the day. And though the cowboy rode away, leaving only dust in his path, his actions would remain in the memory of the town. The moment he fired into the air had changed the course of the day, reminding everyone that courage and truth could prevail, even in the face of fear. Clara closed her eyes, letting the calm wash over her. She had been judged, she had been tested, but she had emerged stronger. And in the quiet that followed, she understood that the town, too, had changed in subtle ways that would be remembered for years to come. The events of the day would be spoken of in hushed tones, in careful retellings, not as a story of shame or punishment, but as a story of reflection, courage, and the moment when one unexpected act gave people the chance to see the truth. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. Clara stood in her doorway for a moment, looking out at the fading light. She felt a quiet determination rise within her. The past could not be changed, but the future was hers to shape.